Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. Happy Wednesday. It has been, I think, not maybe a week, but maybe a week since I've been back here. I had some time off, then did a little bit of other things Monday and Tuesday. So it's a little bit weird having had this daily show going since March, since COVID, and then having a few days away from it. It's a little bit weird. So hopefully y'all are back here today with us for another Lunch Break Live. Today we are talking about schools. We know schools have been a hot topic since March, since they first shut down for COVID through the summer, and since they made these decisions in August and September to go back. But believe it or not, it is October 7th. We are at the end of the first quarter for Alabama schools. So time is marching on, whether we like it or not. And many of these schools have made decisions about what they're going to do for the next 9 weeks, for the second quarter. So today I am joined by our own Trish Crain. She is our education expert. She's going to give us a little bit of an overview of what's happening at schools and what's going on. Is there any sort of plan for these schools? So Trish, thanks so much for coming today and trying to sort this out a little bit. We know that so many schools are kind of doing their own thing. It doesn't seem like there is one statewide plan.
You are correct. And you could pretty much sum it up that way. You know, everybody needs to really be tuned into their own school district to see. You can't look, if you're in Birmingham City, don't look at what Jefferson County's doing. You know, like on severe weather days, you can kind of guess, but no, everybody's doing their own thing.
And that I know can be so frustrating for many parents who have had to figure out how to work their full-time job, how to do virtual learning, and how to just make all of these things work. So we know that there are several schools who have gone either from totally virtual to or the alternating schedule to a 5-day-a-week in-person schedule. I know several schools are starting that next week. Trish, what are we expecting to see from that 5-day-a-week in-person school?
Well, the only thing I can compare it to is there are schools that have been 5 days a week since school started. One of the things that you can say is that it doesn't appear that schools are the source of transmission of coronavirus, which is what everybody was really afraid of, right? I mean, nobody wants to think of schools as super spreaders. So far, that does not seem to be the case. I mean, there have been a couple of schools that have closed down. We've got a couple of school districts in North Alabama that are going to shut down for a few days. I think at the end of this week or the start of next week, for some deep cleaning. They've had some trouble with not necessarily COVID positive cases, but quarantining, because one positive case or one major symptomatic case can knock out, 15 people have to go home and quarantine. And as the ADPH folks say, you can't test yourself out of quarantine or test your way out of quarantine. You have to serve those 14 days at home.
And I know you talk about this really good news that we have seen that schools, at least in Alabama, do not seem to be a super spreader event of coronavirus, which we have Cynthia saying great news. Yes, I think a lot of people are with you, Cynthia, on that. But I think a lot of people are probably also surprised by that because we know a lot of our younger kids that have been in school 5 days a week. We know that as well behaved as they might be and as good as they might be about wearing their mask or washing their hands, that kids are just gonna not be sometimes as careful as adults. And of course, sometimes they are more careful than some adults. We have seen that as well. But I think a lot of people were saying, oh, they're kids, they're gonna be putting their hands in things, putting their hands in their mouth, or they're not gonna properly wear their mask. Or I think people were just probably expecting to see a little bit more spread there.
Yeah, I talked with Dr. Harris, Scott Harris, the Chief Medical Officer for Alabama Department of Public Health. On Monday, we were talking about this COVID dashboard that I think we'll talk about in a minute. But I asked him, what do you think so far? How's the school year going? And he said he was pleasantly surprised. And I know Dr. Mark Wilson, the Jefferson County's Chief Health Officer, said in a letter in guidance to schools this week that, it doesn't appear that schools are the source of the transmission of the virus. However, all that in a lot of districts, they're still on staggered schedules, and a large percentage of kids are doing virtual school. So you don't have full classrooms. Even if everybody goes back to school 5 days a week, it still might only be 80% of your kids or 60% of your kids, right? So I think the real test comes when we all get back in school 5 days a week. And then we'll have to see what happens. But I will say this, I want to say this because I don't think the general public really understands how hard schools are working, the people in schools, to mitigate the spread, to make sure that kids don't pass it from each other or give it to a teacher or, a teacher give it to a kid. They are working really hard, washing hands, hand sanitizers, serving meals in classrooms, spacing kids out, keeping kids apart from each other. And I think it's, Dr. Harris has given schools credit. He said, really, they deserve the credit. They are really working hard to keep this spread from happening.
Well, and we know that Jefferson County, most populous county in the state, their schools, I believe they already went back to in-person school the other day. And do you expect, or do you know if Jefferson County officials expect to see a rise in cases from that attendance going up?
I have not, no one's really, I think you can say everybody expected it to go up when we went back to school, right? And there have been some cases, but again, they don't appear to be from classroom spread. Usually it's somebody bringing it in from the outside because a family member has it, or, they've been exposed through some other, social mechanism or something. So I think no one has said directly, yes, we expect cases to rise, but I think this reporter and other people will be keeping a close eye on what happens with the spread.
Well, and I'm sure everybody's interested in that, and especially because right now there is a dashboard coming. We'll get to that in a second. But right now, people are really having to depend on their own separate school district to get that information about cases. And I'm not a parent, but I can imagine that would be very scary as a parent, and at times probably very frustrating. We know we've got Melissa saying, this is all great news, but when your kid's quarantined, it's not great news.
Right.
So what are we seeing from parents, and what are we seeing about the information that schools are giving about when they are having to send kids home for quarantine, when they're having to send adults home?
Well, so some school districts are being very transparent. I know one school district in Southeast Alabama is every time a case is identified, they put it on Facebook, even if it's just one case, and they're telling you whether it's a student or a teacher. I know other school districts are putting out sort of weekly counts of here's how many kids actually were positive, and here's how many were quarantined, here's how many teachers were positive, here's how many teachers were quarantined. Some of it are doing it by school, some of them are not, and some of them are not sharing that information on a public forum at all, right? They might be emailing parents directly or calling parents directly, or somehow otherwise getting that information directly to parents. But there is a concern that some school districts are not being transparent enough with their parents and with their teachers. Teachers, I've heard from students and from teachers this idea that all of a sudden people just aren't there anymore. Right? You walk in one day and you've got a different teacher at the head of the classroom, a substitute teacher, or, someone else is guiding your class, and you don't know why. And they don't tell you why, because of, privacy concerns. So, and then other times, I think parents of children who are quarantining, the thing I guess to remember is that this is to keep from getting other kids exposed, right? It's like a sacrifice for the greater good. I think it's really hard because, if you've put your child in in-person school, it's because you want them in the classroom, right? But I think we all knew going into this that there could be a lot of in and out. If you are, in close contact, which is within 6 feet for 15 minutes over the course of a day, it's cumulative, not consecutive. So if you are deemed to be in close contact, you must quarantine according to state health guidelines.
Well, and we've got one person calling out a district here saying that she doesn't think that they have been transparent enough. Have you heard from parents that have similar feelings?
Oh, yes, sure. And I think, it's interesting. I talked with a county school district who said, no, we're just not going to put that information out. Like it's speculative. It's not because what schools are required to report cases to the ADPH if there are major symptoms, right? So it may not be COVID positive, but it's just a kid with major symptoms or a teacher with major symptoms. And I'm sorry, I don't have those memorized, so I don't even want to say what those are, but they are, we've reported on those a lot. But, and then if a child has major symptoms, those in close contact, I mean, they don't have to be COVID positive. They just have to show major symptoms, right? And so then those kids have to go quarantine. But so this is the fear that, I've seen teachers say, well, half my class disappeared, but nobody told me that I needed to go home. So they feel like maybe school district officials or really school building officials aren't being straight up with them, which is sad. Like, I think that this level of transparency is kind of new for schools. You don't talk about health conditions. But this is something that is, they're struggling with. So we have this state dashboard coming, right? About a month ago, we were told that ADPH and the State Department of Education were working on a dashboard. I wrote about it a couple of times. It still hasn't come through. There's some logistical problems. How do you what information are you going to gather and what are you going to share? So I made the mistake of assuming, which I know better than that, but assuming that it would all just sort of flow through the information portal that already exists. But what I found out from Dr. Harris, and I have not yet written about this, I want to see what Dr. Mackey has to share with the state board tomorrow, is that this is going to be a voluntary participation with school districts reporting. And from what Dr. Harris said, it sounded like it was going to be on a weekly basis, the number of COVID positive cases, period.
But that is not going to be a required thing for schools to report, is it?
No, but the feeling is that if you are in, what I have seen is kind of like a domino effect. If one school district starts reporting it, then the one next door starts reporting it too. And a lot of that is going to have to come from pressure from board members, board members who represent the public and the community. If board members want it to happen, it's probably going to happen. And if there a large enough contingent of the parent community wants it to happen, it's probably going to happen. So we'll see when this thing rolls out. It doesn't sound like it's going to be out in time for parents to really make good decisions about whether they want to continue with in-person school or move to virtual school for the second 9 weeks. But it will be out there. Other states are doing it. People are doing it in a lot of different forms. And, it's like, how much information is enough? I want all the information, that's me. But there are privacy concerns.
Well, and we've got Brenda, and I kind of have the same question as you, Brenda. She says, why is this not going to be a standard that you have to report this information to the dashboard? Why is it going to be left up to the school and to those officials and to the district officials to make that decision?
That is a great question, and one that I intend to talk with Dr. Mackey about tomorrow, because Dr. Mackey is our state superintendent, Eric Mackey, and he will be, of course, at the state board meeting tomorrow. But I'm not sure. In Alabama, we really pride ourselves on local control of education, and we have since 1854. And so we don't like the state telling us what to do. We don't like the feds telling us what to do. We want all of that information flow, the curriculum that we choose, the textbooks we choose, how we pay teachers, who we hire as teachers. I mean, there's some minimum floors that's on some of those topics that school districts have to abide by. And of course, school districts do have to report the information to the Alabama Department of Public Health. Like, that is a definite, like that, there's no going around that. But even that, school districts aren't doing their own testing by and large, right? So they are reliant on parents to self-report and teachers to self-report. And so, you could have, I mean, who's to say that the information to the schools is 100% accurate? Like, you hope it is. You hope that parents are, being forthcoming, and so that other kids and other families don't get exposed. And we've seen no evidence that that's not the case. So it's not it's local control, we like our local control.
Well, and we've got so many people, and I think we should go ahead and say this. We've got people that are just thanking our teachers, and that is absolutely what we need to do. We'll take a second to thank all of our school employees, teachers, staff, faculty, everybody that works in a school. Our heart is going out to you and for all of the work you are doing. Yeah. And talking about, kind of segueing from how much we appreciate our teachers to how often teachers are underappreciated across, and that is in our state and across the country. We've got, I know Susan saying she teaches for a school and was not informed when another teacher tested positive. And unfortunately, I know that there have been other teachers expressing those concerns. Trish, you wrote recently that Alabama is seeing a rise in the number of school employees who have chosen to retire this year. I think you said, I'm looking at this to make sure I get it right, September 2020, there were 2 times as many retirements as the last 2 Septembers, last 2 years in September. And I think it's kind of impossible to say that this COVID situation is not a factor in that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what was interesting when I've been following the data, the retirement data, and the teachers' retirement system has been really helpful to provide that data, trying to see what is happening with teachers, because what we saw in June and July were lower than normal numbers, or lower than average, lower than usual numbers, especially over the last 5 years. But then that translated into more teachers retiring in August and September. And of course, teachers are allowed to make those very personal decisions whenever they need to make them, right? It does put additional stress on a school district because they then have to replace that teacher. And we know there's a teacher shortage, right? So but I think it looked like a lot of teachers were waiting to see what would happen with school. Would we be able to go back to regular in-person school? Mary Ann Hayward, who's the president of the Central Alabama AFT chapter, I talked with her and she said, probably a lot of teachers who were older, who really, they're teachers because they want to be with kids and they want to be in classrooms, and that's what they know. And technology, that separation just is not very exciting for them. And they would have to learn a whole new way, because it's not as simple. We know it's not as simple as just talking into the thing and the camera as if you were teaching a classroom. Keeping kids engaged, knowing how much work to give them, it's a very different way of teaching. So my heart goes out to teachers. As the mother of a teacher in another state, she's a young teacher and these are tough decisions, and her teacher friends are having to make tough decisions. I don't know if this is going to translate into more in October and November and December as schools continue to open, but we cannot afford to lose our teachers. Like we don't have enough teachers in the pipeline to replace the teachers that are in the classrooms right now. And I know that parents are frustrated. I know teachers are frustrated with parents, and with kids who aren't being engaged and aren't showing up for virtual school. And this is just really, really hard. I heard a lot in the beginning that we need to give each other a lot of grace, and understand the competing pressures of opening schools in a safe way and still meeting kids' social emotional needs and keeping teachers safe and keeping kids safe. Like, it's just, for every action, there's an opposite reaction. And I do not envy superintendents at this moment.
I don't envy teachers, school staff, faculty, superintendent. I don't envy anybody that is working in the school system, or parents at this point. We've got, I've got a couple good questions for me. One's from Susan, and it's more of a comment, but I think that this begs the question. She talks about adults in her school building not properly wearing masks. Trish, who is responsible in the school building in your elementary school, your high school? Who is the person in charge to say, hey, Mrs. Smith needs to put on her mask, or, Mr. Bob is not wearing his mask, let me go tell him to do that? Who is that point person who's really in charge, or is there a point person?
Well, inside a school building, the principal is where the buck stops, right? Every time. The principal is in charge of pretty much everything that goes on in that building. So if there are problems with teachers not wearing masks, I think, I would advise parents and other teachers, if teachers are worried about their colleagues not wearing masks, go to the principal and just say, I'm worried, there's a statewide mask order. Like this is not voluntary at this point. And so I think that I would speak with the principal. Pictures help, but I'm not telling anybody to take pictures. I just think that, as long as the mask order is mandatory, teachers must wear masks.
We've got another question from Barbara, and she says, "Is there still a teacher shortage with virtual school?"
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is really interesting. In some places, there's such a teacher shortage. Like the larger districts seem to have been able to sort of give teachers either a virtual or an in-person assignment, so you can concentrate one or the other. But then in the smaller districts, I'm seeing teachers having to do both. And that can be really challenging to create a lesson that's good for virtual and to create a lesson for in-person teaching. Those are just different audiences, and so I think that I don't see, you're still supposed to have a certified teacher or a teacher on their way to get a certificate teaching students. Like you can't just put me in front of a camera, to teach kids. You have to have certified teachers. So I think it depends on the size of the district. If you have supplemental personnel, if maybe you have some teachers that are reading specialists back at the central office that then can be, working with kids on a day-to-day basis on a virtual platform. But yeah, there is still very much a teacher shortage.
We've got a good question from Christine. She says, if all students are masked in class and in school, why are we enforcing a 14-day quarantine for kids who are around a COVID positive student? And she said, I understand this was from ADPH, but she's just, begging the question here.
Yeah, I'm not a medical expert, so I have to rely on what I'm hearing. And that is that, even with the mask on, you can be exposed, right? So if the way I understood it is the mask protects other people from my germs, but it doesn't necessarily protect me from other people's germs. So, or the virus, so I think out of an abundance of caution probably is why that rule exists. And, again, we're not going to know. It's hard to say. I can remember Dr. Harris saying this at the very beginning, like whatever we do, we're not really going to know, because if we take all the precautions and people still get sick, we'll say, well, the precautions weren't enough. But if we take none of the precautions and people get sick, we'll never know. So, the old sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing.
And it's the truth. I feel like I'm on a boat. I keep swaying. I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to keep one of my dogs a hand on this dog so he does not start barking. Excuse me. Got a couple quick more questions for you, Trish, before we get going. And this is one from Nancy. She says that one of these schools in this district, I'm assuming that she is in, they do not require students to wear masks except for in the hall. Is this okay according to the governor's mandate?
No. I think remember the governor's mandate applies to, I think it's second grade and up. So you could have pre-K or kindergarten or first graders not wearing masks in the classroom. So I think I'd want to know what grade it is, but no, kids in classrooms are supposed to wear masks. Mm-hmm. So again, I think there are some exceptions, of course, for kids with special needs, or there are other exceptions about depending upon the activity that they're doing. In PE, I don't think they're required to wear masks if they're, exerting themselves. But in classrooms, my understanding is that kids are supposed to wear masks.
Well, and we've got Susan, who I think mentioned earlier she might teach at a Jefferson County school. She says, Dr. Gonsolin has made his expectations clear. We will wear masks at school. I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to let you go and let this little one run a little bit more wild. But we have a question about the comparison. And I'm not sure if you know this number, but I'm going to ask you anyway. From Barbara, she says about Alabama enrollment in national virtual classrooms versus local districts. How many Alabama kids are now homeschooling?
Homeschooling. Well, we never really know how many kids are homeschooling, right? I mean, that just no one is required to report that number. So what happens is, I mean, you're technically required to tell your school district that you're homeschooling, like that's part of Alabama law, but it's not enforced. So last I heard, about 3% nationwide of families were estimated to be homeschooling based on some surveys that the government does, federal government does. We will know, so the 20-day ADM count, average daily membership count, it's 20 days after Labor Day. So I believe that meant that it ended this past Monday. So we're going to know how many kids are actually in school. That's going to be pretty much the only indicator that we have. Like, did a bunch of kids disappear? I mean, that's the fear is that, like, parents have choices. Parents can homeschool. You just want to make sure that they're getting a rigorous education that prepares them for life after school, right? So if parents choose homeschooling because they choose, like, we have things we want our kids to learn and our local school doesn't offer that, that's one choice. But you have to make sure that everybody's making the choices for good reasons for the child. I will say there has been, the alarm has been sounded a bit on missing kindergartners. I'm hearing some school districts say we're missing our kindergartners, like parents just didn't enroll their kindergartners this year. And kindergarten's not required under Alabama law. But the question then becomes, next year, do you put them into kindergarten or do you put them into first grade? We have this thing, and I'm not going to go deep because I know your dog is ready to go. But the Literacy Act, the Alabama Literacy Act, is now in effect. And if children are not reading on grade level by third grade, they are to be held back. There are some exceptions, but the vast majority of children should be reading on grade level by third grade, or they will be held back. So if you've missed a year of kindergarten and you've not gotten some sort of supplemental instruction that's sort of equivalent to kindergarten, and you start in first grade, there's going to be a lot of work to do to get children ready to be reading on grade level by third grade. So I think there's a little bit of fear among superintendents. How are we, are we going to have the resources? Where are we going to put kids if they're all over the spectrum in terms of, yes, we've been to school and yes, we haven't in the first grade? A lot of that we're going to learn in the coming weeks. I'm keeping a close eye on enrollment numbers as soon as they release them.
Well, and I think, unfortunately, this is something that this COVID effect on the world, but even on kids and their education, is something that we are going to see for a while to come. We're going to really see next year if kids are prepared. And that's if school is back to, quote, normal next year. We will see how everybody is starting that year. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I've got Susan saying that she wishes she could watch more often. Susan, tune in anytime. And if you cannot watch at 11, just come back and you can watch it after it is recorded and posted on our Facebook page. Once after it's live, it does go in our video area. So thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciated it. Trish, thank you for all of your information. If anybody has questions about schools, please let me know. Leave it in the comments. I will get it to Trish. And again, we appreciate you. We will see you tomorrow.